Good evening, and welcome to Fine Point, where no narrative is sacred, no media hoax is safe, and we zero in on the big picture. I'm your host, Rion. Can you feel it in the wind? It's 1775. Again. America is in need of a good cleanup, and that is what Trump's inauguration Monday signifies. Cleaning house is dirty work. It's getting rid of things you've been holding on to for a little too long. And that's Washington right now on the eve of Trump's return. Exhibit 1, the ouster of Mike Turner. Now, Mike Turner isn't a household name, so his firing may not mean much to you right now, but it's a big deal. And Democrats and Mockingbird Press are panicking. And I use that last line deliberately. The old guard, CIA and Swamp, are very upset over Mike Turner's firing.
On a big shakeup on Capitol Hill, the Speaker of the House firing the Republican chair of the House Intel Committee. Why? What does this mean?
Exactly. It is extraordinary as well. Mike Turner is known for being bipartisan as chair in his oversight of the intelligence community. I spoke with him. He told me this afternoon, Speaker Johnson called him into his office and said, "You're fired. There are concerns from Mar-a-Lago." In other words, Donald Trump, the president-elect, told Mike Johnson to fire the man overseeing the intelligence community who has access to some of the nation's greatest secrets. Now, there was no explanation as to why, but big picture here, Nora, this is not how government's supposed to work.
Correction. This is not how the swamp is supposed to work. Translation? The swamp just lost another lifeline. Mike Turner is a Republican congressman from Ohio's 10th district. He's been a full-time D.C. politician for 22 years. Turner is at the heart of Republican circles, a long-standing figure in the establishment. He's been a Ukraine NATO hawk. He loves the FISA court's ability to spy on any American it wants. He loves sending billions to the military-industrial complex. He is, in turn, loved by the current intelligence community. Turner's firing is important. Take heart in this headline because it has all the right people panicking. Our friend Molly Hemingway noted dryly, the Democrats are far more upset about Mike Turner being removed from the intel community than any Republican. She highlights Democrats like Congressman Himes of Connecticut bemoaning Turner's firing. Quote, "His removal makes our nation less secure and is a terrible portent for what's to come. The Constitution demands Congress function as a check on the executive branch, not cater to its demands." And Nancy Pelosi protege, House Democrat Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, going out of his way to make known he loved and supported this good Republican. In a press release, quote, "Mike Turner is a serious, thoughtful, and highly principled leader whose work as chair of the House Intel Committee has been extremely impactful." And if you needed any more convincing that all the right people are upset at Turner's departure from this role, here's failed Hollywood screenwriter and part-time CIA mole, Adam Schiff, who was none too pleased either.
Why do you believe Mike Turner was fired?
Well, I think he didn't pass the test at Mar-a-Lago. And look, this is someone I served with on the Intelligence Committee. It was a vast improvement on Devin Nunes. But at the same time, even while he was willing to carry a lot of water for Donald Trump, particularly during that first impeachment, he wasn't willing to carry enough, apparently. And so Johnson is here doing the bidding of Donald Trump, removes Mike Turner.
So here's what's really happening. I'm getting this from sources very high up. Mike Turner was caught trying to stack the deck against Donald Trump inside the White House National Security Council. This was an attempted hostile takeover of the NSC. Donald Trump stood up to Turner, who was trying to siphon off his people and snake them into the machine. Remember, a few weeks ago, key former Trump NSC people raised some alarms. They caught the machine trying to ensure that key Biden national security people were to remain past Inauguration Day. Essentially, if Mike Turner's plan would have succeeded, Turner would have had all his people running the Trump White House NSC and, in turn, running the entire Trump national security apparatus. What does that mean? The National Security Council touches every agency inside the federal government. Mike Turner would have been the de facto president of the United States, under the guise of being a good, supportive Republican just helping out. Power of staff. This is what cleaning up the swamp looks like. And it's not even Monday yet. So take heart, my friends, and remember, the cleaning up is going to feel messy at times, but you don't miss trash once it's dumped. Texas Congressman Michael Cloud joins us on how to finally keep government fat off once and for all. Up next.
You've probably heard about ivermectin, the medication that has been making the waves for years and helping so many during COVID. But let's be honest, finding a reliable source to get it, that's not as easy as it should be. That's why I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy. They're making it simple and straightforward to get ivermectin. Their ivermectin is made right here in the USA, not imported from India or China. All Family Pharmacy will handle both the prescription and the medication and ship it right to your door. Visit allfamilypharma.com/Matt with coupon MATT10 for 10% off.
.1633 800-989-1633.
Breaking earlier today, according to the Washington Post, Vivek Ramaswamy, the co-commissioner of the proposed Department of Government Efficiency, is planning a run for governor of Ohio. Will Elon be left to be running Doge by himself? Who comes in to take Vivek's place? This all leads to the broader question. Doge is such a gem of a concept, a beautiful injection of MAGA cleanup. What is its long-term future? Does it disappear with its creators? I hope not. Congressmen like Michael Cloud of Texas are making sure the ideas and what the proposed department represents is here to stay. How? Well, he's here to explain it to us. He's introduced on Thursday the Federal Agency Sunset Commission Act to keep the bloat of the federal bureaucracy in check. Its purpose is to reinforce Doge's mission. Joining us now is Congressman Michael Cloud. Congressman, thank you so much for making the time.
Oh, sure thing. Good to be with you.
How does this bill work, and how do we actually ensure Doge goes on?
Well, you know, Doge has excited so many people here on the Hill, but it's excited many people, of course, across America. We know that the federal government has grown way beyond its original intent. The idea was to have a limited government that maximized freedom among Americans, and of course, as government grows, freedoms get restricted. And as we especially head to a fiscal cliff, $36 trillion in debt, we have come to a point where this is a crisis where we've got to get our federal situation under control. And so the creativity, of course, that Vivek and Elon have brought to the table in addressing some of these fiscal issues that Congress has had trouble dealing with in the past has brought some new energy to it that's really, really important.
Well, my fellow primetime host, your former colleague, Matt Gaetz, he has long said that it's not about the tax cuts. It has to be about the spending. We have to cut bloat. So with Doge, because it's so new as a concept, and its execution it feels so real at the helm of Musk and at the helm of Vivek. We still have basic questions about it. They include things like, well, what is going to go first? Are we going after entitlements? Are we going after just general government bloat in each department? You as a lawmaker, you've had conversations with Doge. Where does the sentiment lie right now about where to go first?
Well, I think one of the biggest areas we need to start is reining in the federal bureaucracy. And so that'll find us some savings. We'll have to continue to do more. But right now, virtually every single agency has grown well beyond its original mandate. And many of them have just frankly become a burden on the American people, some even weaponized against the American people. And so it's a great place to do, in a sense, what Elon did with Twitter, now X, where he went in, 75% of the employees found another line of work, shall we say, and you have a better product for it. That can happen with the federal government for the American people. We can get rid of a lot of the waste, fraud, abuse, error, corruption, and shrink the federal government, but actually have a better product for the American people to deliver. And so that's really I think the first steps of Doge. And then you mentioned the bill we introduced, the Federal Sunset Commission Act, and the idea is that right now we have over 1,000 programs, agencies that aren't even authorized. Many of these agencies, programs, it's hard to get a number on what exists. If nobody evaluates after they're built up, if they're actually doing what they were created, are they accomplishing the goals? And so the Federal Agency Sunset Commission Act would basically put in a process that would take what Doge is starting and create a system where this becomes a habit of the federal government, where we're constantly reevaluating these programs and these agencies to make sure they're providing a good ROI for the American people.
Where do you think you'll have the most difficulty department-wise? If I were to guess, I would imagine the Defense Department would be one of the toughest areas to tackle. The military-industrial complex is strong. Establishment-minded colleagues are very much in line with keeping it alive. Is that going to be the hardest department to go after?
Any area that you're going to cut spending or rein in someone's authority or power in Washington, D.C. is going to be difficult. The reason we have the status quo is there's people benefiting from the status quo. And anytime you move that, those people in those positions of influence are going to work to keep that from happening. Certainly the DOD and our military-industrial complex and defense industry, while they have value, we have weapon systems that we're using. I've often kind of joked, but there's a lot of truth to it, that the F-35, one of the greatest advancements in it wasn't that the technology that was built in it. The genius behind it was that they built a supply chain that goes through 35 states or so. And so, every district wants to support the job back home. And so, as opposed to us looking forward and saying, okay, what are the future technologies? And so when it comes to defense, yes, we need to be efficient in how we're spending our money, but the biggest thing is we need to be looking strategically at the future technologies we need to win future wars, and not putting so much investment into systems that are really going out of date.
Well, you mentioned something that triggered a memory of one of Biden's farewell speeches. You said, one of the reasons it's so difficult to change things in Washington is because someone's always benefiting from something. And when you're taking the candy away from the kid, it's going to be a bit of a fight. That said, Joe Biden, on his way out from, as departing president, leaving ashes for a legacy, did come up with a final parting word of advice. He says that Congress members need to stop insider trading. This is an idea that's been around a long time. What do you make of Biden suggesting this on his way out?
It's, you know, he's been president for 4 years, and if he wanted action on it, he certainly could have moved on it. I'm a co-sponsor on that legislation to see it done, so I'd like to see it across the finish line. But it's novel that on the way out, you know, I'm not sure how much of that was a shot at Nancy Pelosi with their tenuous relationship right now than it was actually meant to be something to move the ball forward. You know, I'd love to see that become law. But even more so, we need to take that a step further. And there's people in the executive branch that also need to, because, you know, you just mentioned the military-industrial complex. Well, we need to make sure people at the Pentagon aren't also making decisions based on their stock portfolio, but they're making decisions, you know, so, and that's just one example. You can go to NIH or anything else, you know, the FDA, and, you know, so at a certain executive level in the federal branch, or the executive branch, we need to make sure that those same sort of provisions happen. And we have a bill to address that as well.
Those all seem like excellent bills, and conceptually, people, you know, voters support it. But time and again, every time someone tries to move the ball forward to try and limit insider trading in Congress, it always seems to die. I mean, are we facing another chapter where it somehow remains because way too many people are benefiting, or is the pressure finally here to put an end to it?
I like to think we're getting to a critical mass. The American people are aware and more alert than ever. The you know, legacy old school media doesn't have the impact to mislead the American people that they've had in the past. And so people are aware. That helps Congress to be more aware and alert and accountable to the American people. And you know, I think with the likes of the Doge and movement and President Trump coming in and us recognizing that really we have an 18-month window to do everything we can to save the country. This has got to be not about us. It's got to be about the American people and about making sure we preserve, protect these awesome liberties that we've inherited and pass them on to the next generation. And so we've got to be about that. That's got to drive the day and the decisions that are being made. No doubt.
You know, another bill that you. Oh, of course. You know, another challenge is a bill that you also introduced this week, the No Retaining Every Gun in a System That Restricts Your Rights Act, the No Registry Act. It's a word, it's a mouthful. Talk about why that's important and what's the momentum under it.
Well, we're really excited for the moment it is. This is, again, an issue we've been working on quite some time, where a few years ago we found out that the ATF had collected millions of gun records over the course of a year, and we thought that seems inordinate. That seemed like a large amount for a short time. And so we began an investigation and found out that indeed they had created a database that included about 1 billion records, gun records, on the American people, a searchable digital database. Now, it's already illegal to have a federal gun registry, and they say, well, you know, we're kind of disconnecting the name. They basically take a half step out of it and say, well, it's not a registry, it's just a searchable database. Well, it's an easy workaround, and so by all practical purposes, this is a gun registry, if not the certain makings of it. And so it's illegal at its outset. We're pushing back against it, but what they've done to even weaponize the ATF to go after legal firearm owners across this country has been devastating, and doing everything they can to collect as much information on these people. It's dangerous for the federal government to have this kind of power. That's why we have the Second Amendment, to ensure that we understand this is a God-given liberty. This isn't a grant from government. The right for people to protect themselves, to protect their homes, is a God-given liberty that we understand even supersedes our Constitution. It's just protected in our Constitution. It's something that we have to make sure that we're working to uphold here in Congress.
You know, the mindset of the left just never seems to cease to amaze. They don't care who comes through our border. They don't want to keep a registry of anyone who's coming through our southern or northern border, or any border for that matter. And yet, if you are an American citizen and you own a gun, as is your constitutional right, you have to be documented and stored. I mean, that's the contrast in how they're treating Americans versus citizens is stunning.
It is, and that's one of the tragedies of the Biden administration. It's really been this perversion of justice, where you have Department of Justice even going and people who are praying at abortion clinics, they get locked up, but people who commit violent crimes are being released. Even we saw in the pardons that Biden had, with his own son, but even beyond, granting clemency to violent criminals across our country, us letting them into our country, but yet putting extra scrutiny on law-abiding citizens. It's just devastating, and everything they've done through DEI, through ESG, through all these different kind of things, basically to pervert our language in a way to call good evil and evil good. It's devastating to our culture. We see what's going on in Europe. They're just a half step ahead of us, where they're actually putting people in jail for 7 years for a bad post on social media, yet letting criminals roam the streets free. We can't have that in the United States. That's not what this is about. We're one nation under God, indivisible, and we've got to have justice be exactly what it's supposed to be. Happy to see that go. Happy to see President Trump in just a few days be sworn in, and us get back to common sense here in our country.
Well, it is. It's just a few days from now. But breaking news today now is that the inauguration on Monday appears to be moving inside. The weather is going to be it's going to be snowing. It appears the temperature is dropping to single digits. What normally happens? Do you expect to have the core group kind of move inside the well of Congress? What do you hear?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out all those details now. We've been working for several days. There's hundreds of people coming through our office and many of the other offices, where people just excited to see and witness this moment in history firsthand, the return of President Donald J. Trump to the Oval Office. Of course, disappointed that it's being moved indoors, but understand the health issues that could be at play with the extreme cold weathers and security issues that could be implicated as well. So certainly understand it. It's certainly disappointing news, but looking on the bright side, it's not unprecedented. Ronald Reagan's second term was also indoors and moved in for very similar reasons, and we can look at that as a pretty good mark on history in the long run. And so while it's disappointing, the important thing is that Donald J. Trump will be back in the Oval Office, making America great again.
That's right. No, that's right. Reagan did move his second inauguration indoors. I think it was even colder then. It was something like -8 degrees outside. So I think a lot of people were disappointed but grateful not to have to experience frostbite.
Right.
Congressman, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless you.
Well,
Tem uma enorme história no futebol, é uma grande potência.
Eu sou pouco mais novo, mas também lembro do Pelé.
I'm a little younger, but I also do remember Pelé.
Aproveitar a oportunidade e entregar-lhe também uma camisa, né? Que simboliza ali o maior jogador de todos os tempos, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, que nos deu muita alegria no futebol. E é um prazer aqui entregar essa camisa com o teu nome atrás. Ok? Thank you.
That was former President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. He was invited to President-elect Trump's inauguration this Monday, but it looks like he will not be making the flight. Brazil's Supreme Court denied Bolsonaro the restoration of his passport to fly to D.C., citing Bolsonaro's inability to prove he was invited. When in office, he was a close ally of President Trump in South America. The former president of Brazil is under several investigations now and has been deemed a flight risk. He has been accused of trying to stay in power and overturn the results, known internationally as Tropical Trump. He certainly has many parallels to our incoming commander-in-chief, including being a victim of an activist court. Will President Trump be able to help out Bolsonaro in any way? And is it possible he makes a political comeback of his own? And why is that important? Joining us now, Brazilian journalist Paulo Figueiredo. Paulo, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Chanel.
They are bound and determined to send Bolsonaro to jail. What next?
Well, that's the concern that half of the country has right now. And the other news is that Bolsonaro is leading all the polls for the 2026 election in the country, which is the next presidential election just next year. So what they're trying to do is the same thing that they did, or at least they tried to do with Donald Trump. A lot of lawfare to stop Bolsonaro from running, possibly sending him to prison and stopping him from going back to the presidency. Brazil had a very similar problem with the last elections. I mean, most of the country thinks the elections was rigged somehow, if not stolen. The hashtag Brazil was stolen was pretty big on X. So it doesn't look like the current president, Lula da Silva, which is a socialist, is very popular right now. A new poll just came out today showing that his approval rates is on the 30s already. So, and Bolsonaro, again, is leading most of the polls for presidency in 2026. So it looks like their only way to stop Bolsonaro, especially watching what happened in the United States with Donald Trump, is sending him to prison. Stopping him from coming to Donald Trump's inauguration, I think it can also have had a backfire effect in a sense that it became headlines all over the world, and it's exposing the state of dictatorship that Brazil is right now, that we have been talking about for quite some time here in this show.
So many parallels with this last election here in the United States. Lula da Silva is someone that the Biden team loves. They supported him. They really wanted Lula to take over, and he did. The question becomes now, how important is Brazil in the Trump foreign policy scheme? If you're looking at South America, how important is Brazil as an ally in Trump's South America foreign policy vision?
This is always that is very surprising to me. A lot of people don't know that Lula da Silva being the president of Brazil is a direct consequence of Joe Biden's Department of State interference. And if you can look it up online, look up the Financial Times article about the Not Discreet campaign to save Brazil's democracy. They report, it's the Financial Times, they report that the Biden administration sent in 2022, while Brazil was holding the presidential elections, Bolsonaro was obviously running against Lula da Silva, and the Biden administration sent all of their top officials to Brazil to make sure the election results were not challenged. And by that, I mean from the Bill Barnes, the director of CIA, to Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor,
That's right.
to Victoria Nuland, Madame Coup d'etat, and several other high top officials. And the challenge is to understand what Donald Trump is going to do right now with Brazil.
Well, why was it? So just to backtrack a little bit, why was it so important for the Biden agenda to have Lula da Silva unchallenged in Brazil? As you say, I had forgotten about that, but you're right. Biden sent his CIA director, his NSC director, everybody who was anybody inside the Biden foreign policy, office or agenda was down there making sure that Silva stayed. Why?
Oh, and also we had direct funding from the American taxpayer through USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, for the disinformation campaigns in Brazil that were the roots of all the censorship that empowered Lula da Silva and Alexandre de Moraes. I always tell people that I was on the #1 show. I hosted the #1 show on the Brazilian news TV, and I had words that I couldn't say because they were considered misinformation, disinformation, and that sort of thing on TV, as I had prior censorship. Lula da Silva is the #1 pro-Venezuela. We're seeing now Maduro making threats of Puerto Rico, claiming that he would have help of Brazil. That's all over the news as well. We have, and obviously I can go on and on and on, but the most Cuba, Brazil is financing Cuba as well. But it's not only that. The most important thing is Brazil is aligning itself with China. Brazil sold its largest uranium reserve in the Amazon a couple of weeks ago to the Chinese. Brazil is working with the Chinese to undermine the dollar as the global currency through the BRICS and through the Mercosur. Why would the Biden administration want Lula as a president? It puzzles me. I don't know the answer. I'm more concerned right now with what the Donald Trump's administration is going to do about Brazil, because in a sense, Brazil is. I think people don't pay enough attention to Brazil and don't realize the importance. We're talking about a country. Even the term Latin American policy for Brazil is kind of funny. It's like having an Eastern Europe policy and not separate Russia from it, because Brazil is half of South America in terms of territory, in terms of GDP,
Size
in terms
and
of population. It's when you compare the amount of time the United States gives attention and resources to Cuba, for example, and praise the Cubans. I love the Cubans. I'm from South Florida, so they're my best friends. But Cuba is an island with 11 million people and not very important economically. And it's not like the Soviets have missiles there anymore. And the Secretary of State's a Cuban descendant. Love him, Marco Rubio, love him. The Special Envoy for Latin America, also Cuban descendant. And there are no one in the Trump administration from Brazil, although the Brazilian community in the United States right now is the largest South American community and Latin American community in the United States after obviously Mexico. So it's surprising. It's Brazil. It's almost like the U.S. foreign policy is very negligent with Brazil, and the Chinese, they're not.
Oh no, Paolo, you make a solid case, and if any administration officials are listening, I think that's a pretty strong case to saying, like, look, Brazil has some real interests that need to be considered that are separate from the rest of Latin America. That said, the China angle of this conversation is perhaps the most important part when it comes to relevance in the United States and our own national security. Now, China has been making huge inroads in Venezuela, in particular in Cuba. But as you say, Brazil is a huge part of China's plan for dominating the Western Hemisphere economically and strategically. Right now, China is Brazil's top trading partner. With Da Silva at the helm here, does that change? And can it change with tariffs or pressure or policy from the United States? Can we separate China from Brazil as long as Da Silva is at the helm?
Not with Da Silva there. Not with Lula da Silva there. And you're absolutely right. Brazil became Brazil's number one commercial partner during the first tenure of Lula da Silva. It was the United States for almost 200 years, and then it became China during his first and second tenure in the early 2000s. So Lula da Silva is a partner of China. He's openly working with China. He's one of the biggest supporters of the BRICS and of not using the dollar as a global currency. So he's selling everything and partnering up with everything he can with China, to the point that I do think there are some diplomatic instruments, that the United States can use in order to get rid of Lula. And to do that, they just need to restore democracy in Brazil. Because if Brazil has free and fair elections, I am absolutely sure Bolsonaro will win. And then the largest partner and supporter of the United States that Brazil had as a president for decades. I think since my grandfather was a president of Brazil, and until 1985, he was also a big partner of the United States. But Bolsonaro was the biggest partner in the past years. So if Brazil has free and fair elections with opposition leaders allowed to run and no censorship, and we, in a sense that we can make sure that we have paper ballots and we can count and audit the votes, Lula will be gone, Bolsonaro will be back, and we will have the opportunity to have the most important country in the Southern Hemisphere to be aligned with the United States. I believe it would be a very different Donald Trump in the presidency in 2025 than we had in 2017, and a very different Bolsonaro in 2027 than we had in 2019. So I think it would
real
be a great
quick
opportunity
before I let you go. No, it's certainly a overlooked, I guess, foreign policy discussion. Unless you're talking about very specific circles in Washington, D.C., most Americans are not thinking of Brazil and how important that is in our national security, especially for its anchor position in the Western Hemisphere. But before I let you go, next door neighbor, Venezuela's Maduro, that self-proclaimed emperor now for life, he's invited Brazil to liberate Puerto Rico. Where is Maduro and Da Silva's relationship?
Well, Brazil sent representatives to Maduro's inauguration last week. It's almost interesting because it's a very different contrast of worldviews right now, and it shows the crossroads that Brazil is in. While you have Donald Trump inviting Jair Bolsonaro to the inauguration, you have Maduro inviting Lula to his inauguration. Lula didn't go in person, but he sent government officials to represent. So he pretty much agreed that Maduro is the president, recognized Maduro as the president of Venezuela, although at this point we all know the election was clearly stolen in Venezuela, and he, as you said, auto-proclaimed himself the dictator of the country and the emperor of the country. So I don't think Brazil would support, at this point, any, I don't think Maduro is speaking seriously. I think it's just bravado. I think Brazil wouldn't seriously support that at this point, but it shows the alignment and the two different views and the crossroads that Brazil is right now. And again, you said it beautifully. We can't overstate the importance of Brazil geopolitically. We're talking about the fifth or sixth largest population in the world, number 2 iron ore producer in the world, one of the top 3 food producers in the world, and also energy powerhouse. Brazil's reserve right now, Brazil just found out that he had a big reserve in the Amazon region that could be the largest in the world right now. So, and the Chinese are way more aware of that than the Americans.
And that's the scary fact, and it'll be very hard to convince me for years to come that the Biden administration, knowing all of that, didn't do what they have done on purpose. But that's for another day. Paulo Figueiredo, a pleasure and a very illuminating conversation. Thank you so much, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Will history remember President Biden for his failure to secure the border? Todd Bensman joins us.
We immediately surged to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
A much different looking, more sentient looking Biden from just a few years ago. But now, on his way out, one of his final acts as president, Joe Biden continued to cement his failed legacy, rooted in spite, by signing an executive order granting and extending temporary protective status to 1 million migrants in the United States. These migrants are mostly from Venezuela, Ukraine, El Salvador, and Sudan. No surprise, as you saw in that clip from 2020, he seems to believe this to his core. There's a lot of conviction under that. This is viewed as an attempt to stifle President Trump's mass deportation plans, expected to be launched day 1 of his presidency, which begins in just a few days on Monday. Will Trump be able to still take action? Well, of course he will. How difficult will it be? According to our next guest in his latest op-ed, the conclusion is these migrants can't be deported is just another lie from the Biden administration. Todd Bensman, Senior National Security Fellow of the Center for Immigration Studies. He joins us now. He's also the author of Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in U.S. History. Todd, great to have you back.
Good to be here. Thank you.
What is your answer to all of this? How is Trump going to be able to overcome some of these remnant acts from Biden?
Right. Well, first you have to understand that the reason for temporary protected status extensions that he provided to these million immigrants, the justification for it is that we simply cannot return them to their home countries because they're too dangerous. The countries are too dangerous, so we can't deport them. What I call a lie is that the vast majority of, for example, the Venezuelans that just got this deportation protection are not coming from Venezuela. They haven't lived there in years and years and years. They have been living safely and prosperously in safe third other countries like Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, the Caribbean, 15 other countries in Latin America. So you don't have to deport them to Venezuela, which is arguably pretty dangerous. You can deport them to those places. But they're lying to get into the country about where they've been living. They're saying, oh, I need protection because I'm coming directly from Venezuela. That's a very easily disproved lie. They do not warrant protection from deportation. The incoming Trump administration can and should reverse that TPS and force Colombia and some of these other countries to take back the people that they already gave asylum to once.
You've been covering the border on the ground, embedding yourself in these migrant caravans. And I'm curious, now that the Biden administration is coming to a close, after 4 years of Biden, Kamala Harris, radical left policies, what's your conclusion as to why they did this? Why did they open up our borders like this and leave us so vulnerable and so exposed and so hamstrung?
The Biden campaign needed the Bernie Sanders, the Biden campaign needed the Bernie Sanders segment to beat Trump, to emerge from the primary, field of 15 candidates, and then to beat Trump. And their payback was, we're going to give you the immigration portfolio. And those people are crazy. Their ideology that is like a religion. They came from NGOs that make their money from grants and taxpayer money to resettle immigrants. That's who they are. So what they did was they dismantled border enforcement, put incentivizing policies in place to bring in the most that they possibly could to feather their beds. This is about money to direct hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars into their coffers of their former employers and their future employers. That's what I think happened here, and it worked. Really, billions of dollars went into, on both sides of the border, to hundreds and hundreds of NGOs. And I believe that in the coming years that we will find massive fraud, contract steering. People are going to go to prison for this, just like, when COVID happened and we started giving, trillions of dollars to people, all kinds of fraud happened. I believe all kinds of fraud happened, and it was because they were feathering their own nests.
You mentioned, and you've been following the money beautifully, better than most reporters in the country, I will argue, because you were one of the few to really track down these NGOs, their relationship to the UN, how we were giving money to the UN and therefore feeding these NGOs who were then feeding these people through in a very systematic, almost factory type of efficiency. That said, you mentioned it'll take a few years to undo, but isn't it just about turning off the money faucet? If we are funding all of this and Congress stands up, DOJ steps in, we start turning off the money faucet, doesn't it just dissipate, or is that naive?
No, it's one of the factors. It's one of the many important factors. The U.S. taxpayer money that has been going by the billions of dollars every couple of years to the NGOs and the United Nations to facilitate mass illegal immigration through Latin America. I just wrote a piece saying that the same constellation of UN and NGO organizations are now pitching $1.4 billion for 2025-2026. they still want to keep the 2.5 million migrants in Latin America afloat and in beans, so that they can continue to put pressure on the Trump border and maybe even make what he's doing fail. So definitely, if you want to stop that extra little incentivizing problem, you got to cut the spigots off. You got to turn them off. And I do believe that with a trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the White House, that it won't be that hard to reverse the damage or the money flow in 2025, 2026, assuming that that money hasn't already moved into the UN coffers and the NGOs. 230 NGOs, many of them based in the U.S. A lot of them are international, 15 different UN agencies, mostly taxpayer money, U.S. taxpayer money going to fund our own mass migration crisis.
Wow. Another topic I want to revisit, because this was very particular to your findings. For years, I'd only ever heard my husband talk about the fact that the southern border was a place where terrorist watch list people are coming through, and it's more dangerous to be at our southern border than it is to be in Iraq. And shocking, coming from someone who's had multiple tours over there, you popped on my radar because you were saying that you wrote an entire book on this. And you were early on raising the flag about how dangerous it was that our southern border was open, not just because the cartels were coming through, but because radical Islamic elements were coming through. And then you found that they had built a mosque in Mexico. Talk to us about where we are in that conversation.
Sure. Well, outgoing FBI Director Chris Wray has been widely quoted and saying that, the mass migration crisis brought a national security element over the border, which is Islamic terrorists, that we have had 400 on the FBI watch list cross the border. We do have reporting that over 100 were accidentally released in the chaos down there. And we also know that tens of thousands of special interest aliens from those countries in the Middle East crossed the border and were released into the United States. And now we have an actual terror attack that happened, conducted by one of them, a Mauritanian who crossed the southern border from Tijuana into San Diego, made his way to Chicago, and conducted a firearms attack, a rampage through a Jewish Chicago neighborhood, wounding a Jewish man, engaging the police in a 4-minute-long firefight all over this Jewish neighborhood with rounds all over the place. The cops had to shoot him down.
A very downplayed story.
That's right. I just finished a 3-part series. I went to Chicago and fully investigated to the extent that I could, and wrote a 3-part series on that terror attack. It's no longer a hypothetical. It has already happened.
Right, it's
Chris
here.
Warned against it, warned about it, and the current 2025 DHS threat assessment warns about it. The 2024 threat assessment warned about it, and now it's happened.
The changing of the guard can't come soon enough. Todd Bensman, always an illuminating discussion with you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me.